Hi there, this is Dr. Hughes again, and I have some material I've prepared to discuss the Gnostic origins and some of the apocryphal sources of some of the things found in the Qur'an and how it influenced early Islam and why some of this appears in the Qur'an and what that implies. I'm motivated to do this because of some attacks on Christians by Muslims recently. Some things on the internet. It involves doxing and threatening of lives. So, I'm just going to show why this religion is silly. All right, next slide. So, the common thing I hear from Muslims is that Muhammad received the Quran through miraculous revelation. Stuff that appears in it, he could have never heard from any other source. It must have only come from miraculous revelation that came not from his own brain, but straight out of heaven. Because that's the way it is described in the hadith, that angel Gabriel seized him and forced him to recite the Quran. Originally asking him to write it, and he said, I can't write. I don't know why the angel didn't know that. And then finally, Muhammad had to recite it. And so the argument is, anything in the Quran he could not have known from any outside source. Therefore, it must be accurate. And, if we can show that there's other potential ways he could have received some of this, and in fact, if what he's got in there comes from source material that is known to be a hoax or not written by the people that the book says it's written by, that's called pseudo-apocryphal texts, when a person's name's on a book or a letter or a writing as if from them, but was written a century after and could not have been by the person it claims to be written by, then that's can't be trustworthy. It's not trustworthy. If those things appear in the Quran derived from that type of material, that's not a good sign. Doesn't matter if it was miraculous or not. In that case, it would be from a false source. Even worse, and the implication would be it's a satanic miracle then. So that's not going to help here. That is kind of what I'm reacting to, and I'm going to show you why there's things in the Quran that just kind of expose it for what it is. And that's what I'm saying here. But I want to show that Muhammad did have outside influence, and it's even in the writings of Islam that he did. So, first of all, it's presumed that he's born April 20th, 571. I should say 80. 571 AD. And died June 8th, 632 AD. How did he die? There's pretty good reasons to believe he was originally poisoned a few years back after this Battle of Khaybar, where he killed a whole community of Jewish people at Khaybar and slayed all their men, beheaded them, and threw them in a ditch, and then took their wives for his people, and one of the wives he took for himself. And therefore, I think that's a sex slave. She didn't want to be taken, and it's taken as a wife. She's then not happy with that situation and poisons him. This is in Sahih al-Bukhari. Narrated Aisha, the Prophet in his ailment in which he died, so he was poisoned, and a few years later, when he was dying, used to say, Aisha, I still feel the pain caused by the food I ate at Khaybar, and at this time I feel as if my order is being cut from that poison. As he was later dying, a few years later, he must have been sickly up to that point, and then finally dying of this original poisoning. by the wife of someone who he beheaded. So that's just reality. That's what this supposed prophet did. And Surah 69, 44 through 46 makes it clear that if someone's aorta is cut, he's a false prophet, because it says, if Muhammad had forged a false saying concerning us, Allah, we surely should have seized him, and then certainly should have cut off his life artery, aorta. And here Muhammad's concerned that his aorta is being cut from the poison, meaning he's questioning his validity. I wonder why. Anyway, that's a side point. So what I'm going to show here for a little bit comes from the Life of Muhammad, which is an English translation of Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasul Allah. I think this deserves to be bolded as well, just so it's clear. So he's this 8th century Muslim historian whose biography, The Life of Muhammad. And then this is just the English translation by Alfred Guillaume. This is from pages 79 through 81 of the English translation of this Islamic historian. So when he was a child, between the ages of 9 and 12, Muhammad traveled to Syria. This is from Mecca, which is quite a journey, but, halfway from Mecca is still Arabia, and then you just go a little bit farther, like through modern-day Jordan, up, and then you're in Syria before you know it. He's on a merchant caravan with his uncle. His father had passed away, and he was raised by his uncle in a lot of ways. So he goes on this journey, and this was just the first of many. So he was often going on caravan merchant journeys. So you're going to, by definition, have contact with lots of people from different religious backgrounds and different faiths and different understandings of reality. So he could have heard all sorts of stories from people along the way. Wouldn't shock me. So this is to start to show that he wasn't just some isolated person who lived in a bubble and never exited, his little Quraysh tribe. In fact, he did. He traveled a lot, both in early life and later, which I'll show, when his wife Khadija, who was a merchant, who also did caravan journeys, and he helped her as well. So he was constantly exposed to all sorts of ideas. No shock that they would appear in the Quran then. You don't have to appeal to miracles for the stuff to appear in the Quran. You don't have to appeal to miracles. You could just as easily appeal to contacts along the way. But here's one example. He eventually met a Christian monk named Bahira. And there are some Christian sources of this monk. Those are some papers I've read, and he's called Sergius. Some papers I've read that this was a reaction to the Islamic idea of this monk. The whole thing can be made up. The whole thing can be a legend. In fact, some people call it the legend of Sergius. And then these Syriac Christian sources. Syriac was the language of the day by the 4th, 5th century. 4th, 5th, 6th century. The language of the whole Mediterranean area was Syriac by then. So Sergius, this story of Sergius is in Syriac Christian literature, but often as a reaction to this same individual that appeared first in this kind of Islamic literature, who is used for a specific purpose here. So this guy, Bahira, had a mysterious book which is never defined by Ibn Ishaq, like what this book is. It just calls it a book. It doesn't say what it is. So it's like totally a big guess, but I have an educated guess. And I don't think it's the Gospels. So Ibn Ishaq states that there had some sort of description in this book, conveniently, in my opinion, of a coming Arabian prophet with this in this Christian book. Again, we don't know what it is. It never says what it is, but it says it's telling the story, and it says, but here I was expecting the appearance of an Arabian prophet who had a mark on his back. And this mark was described in this book of this coming prophet. It's called the seal of prophethood between his shoulders. And so he goes and looks, and he finds it in the very place described in the book, conveniently. So this mark was kind of a cupping glass mark per this guy's commentary in an addendum. Note that it does not call the book the Injil or the Gospel. And this is the first mention of Muhammad ever found in a previous prophetic writing that we know of. You know, the Qur'an implies that Muhammad's name, his name, should be in the books of the Christians and Jews. And the first appearance of this idea, historically, supposedly, though it looks to me like it's backwritten. Like the Quran has this, you got to find his name in the writings of the Christian. So this was an attempt, probably in a made-up story. But either way, if you're going to make the story up and say it was real, well, you got him exposed to a kind of Christianized, maybe Gnostic monk, I think. If he was anything, he was a Gnostic. But you've written into the story, whether it be true or not, the idea that he's exposed to a Gnostic monk. So you either accept the fact that he was exposed to this monk, so he could have acquired information outside of miraculous revelation from this monk, because you put it in the story, or no, he never. Okay, then no, it's fake. He didn't really have a contact with this monk, so he was in a bubble. So this story in Ibn Ishaq is actually not true. So this idea that he had this seal of prophethood in some mysterious, probably fake Christian story that never existed, but says it was. Okay, so that didn't happen then. So we don't have a place where he's mentioned in a Christian book. So either way, you know, pick your poison, I guess, from these stories. So, okay, the point being there, he's exposed to a monk, potentially. We'll just take it at face value. And this monk had some book. No one knows where it came from or what it's called, because no one bothered to tell us. So I would assume it's not the gospel, or you would have said it, because that would have been very convenient, right, to find him in the gospel. But, you know, you can't find Muhammad's name in the gospel. So we should also review here also that Muhammad's first wife, Khadijah, also was a merchant woman herself, and she was part of the Quraysh, who were a people given to commerce, in page 82 of Life of Muhammad. So they were known for trading and being exposed to other people groups that had different opinions of life and circumstance and stuff, and history and how, you know, stories and legends and whatever they brought to the table, they would talk about. So again, he must have heard about stuff as he went along. So it appears impossible to me for Muhammad not to have extensive interaction with all sorts of Christian, Jews, and members of other religious backgrounds. And I've heard all their stories and legends from all his travel and his merchant caravans, etc. A case can be made that the predominant form of what was Christianity, quote unquote, in the, like, especially northern Arabia in the 7th century, was probably Gnostic, with a lot of apocryphal sources for their Christianity. And we'll get into what Gnostic means in a minute. So, you know, many that I've read on the subject believe it no surprise that so much Gnostic and apocryphal legend shows up in the Quran, because several scholars have posited that regions like the Arabian Desert were a sanctuary for Gnostic heterodox, meaning they weren't orthodox, they were considered heretical Christian groups that happened to find sanctuary in the Arabian area, because the Roman Empire, particularly the Byzantine by then, didn't really have authority or access down there. So it's a place to run away from, you know, the Orthodox, which said, no, you guys can't be believing that. Case in point, in 325 AD, you had the Council of Nicaea, and they stamped out the Arian heresy. there was like 300 something bishops, and 2 of them were the Arians. And they said, guys, no, your heresy doesn't fly with us. That heresy was kind of a docetic heresy. That was, docetic means to have a dualistic, and it was a Gnostic heresy, definitely. So those types of thinkers had to go somewhere. So they probably ended up in Arabia, and therefore highly, Muhammad would have been highly exposed to that form of quote-unquote Christianity. It wasn't the true Christianity, it was the corrupted false one that he actually put his stamp of approval on, which is the problem. Also, an early Christian father, Hippolytus, he mentions an Arabian Gnostic named Monomius, just so, there was actually a person in the Arabian area that was known as a Gnostic, like a major Gnostic teacher, cited by Hippolytus. Now, there's this Gnostic offshoot called Manichaeism. It's definitely not a Gnostic, and it's prevalent in the Arabian Peninsula in the time of Muhammad, and it potentially influenced much of the Quran's perception of Christianity. I'm going to show why. There's a similar, and I have a source for this. These guys from this book, they're scholars, and they're addressing in this chapter of the book how Gnostic influence on early Islam went. So just as Muhammad is described as this final link in the chain of prophetic succession and called the seal of the prophets, so was this guy Mani. So these are maybe some influences for the idea of some of the phraseology that appears in the Quran, borrowed from not Christianity, not Judaism, but from offshoots of Gnosticism like Manichaeism. Mani was a Persian false prophet type guy that was a early teacher, one of the Gnostics from. I'll get into it, but the 2nd century is when kind of Gnosticism started showing up, 2nd century AD. And by the 200s, this guy showed up. So he's not long after the appearance of Gnosticism. And he has very Gnostic views, but he was Persian located. His name's Mani. And he lived 216 to 276 AD. So like I said, the 200s. The religion lasted until about the 13th century, but essentially died out because it's ultimately kind of ridiculous. It wasn't built to last. It's kind of, once I tell you more about Gnosticism here in a minute, you'll realize why. Stuff that's just not going to last. But it's Manichaeism, kind of mixed Christian, pagan, and Gnostic beliefs. But of special interest regarding this connection, what this Manichaeism is to our subject matter here, comes from Al-Kalbi, which is another Islamic historian from the 9th century, oft-cited Islamic authority on pre-Islamic Arabian religious customs, where he cites some Quraysh, which is the tribe of Muhammad, practicing a sect of Christianity, particularly in the city of Hira. Okay, and this is the description. Zendaka, which I do believe is Manichaeism, was practiced by some members of the tribe of Quraysh. You have this chain of reports. Comes down to this guy. I asked Ibn Abbas, where was it that they encountered the Zendaka? He answered, in Hira. They would market their wares there. And there they met Christians who instructed them in Zendaka. So why to believe this? I have the reference linked at the end of the slide set. But this is the source I use. So he's a scholar on this subject matter. So he says several Islamic writers had occasion to observe or to interact with individual members of active Manichaean communities. An allegiance or affiliation, which was most often termed in Muslim sources the heresy of Zendaka. This label allegedly deriving from an Iranian loanword originally applied to the Manichaeans during the Sasanian period by Zoroastrian critics. So what it's saying there is Persian Zoroastrians criticized these Manichaeans, which originated in Persia, or modern day Iran. And so during this period, they used this term to vilify the Manichaeans. So Zendaka was like a negative term they applied to the Manichaeans. This is what the scholar says. So that would mean this Zendaka used here is taking that negative term and not knowing any better and thinking that's what they're called. So that's the negative term applied by the Zoroastrians to these Manichaeans. And they became known as that among the Quraysh, Muhammad's own tribe. So in the Quraysh, Muhammad had direct access to Christian Gnostics. And so this is why their writings and ideas appear in the Quran. Now it's not a mystery, right? So this isn't being downloaded into his head from somewhere in space. He's picking it up from his surroundings and putting it in the Quran as he goes. That's the more likely explanation than getting it from God, who wouldn't put his stamp of approval on false, way too late gospels, using that term very loosely, that showed up in the 2nd century. There's just no way. We know too much now to give that any credit. Okay, I'm going to read the sentence again. This label, allegedly deriving from an Iranian loanword originally applied to the Manichaeans during the Sasanian period by the Zoroastrian critics, was adopted and amplified by Abbasid jurists to denote a broad spectrum of dualist, speculation, and antinomian behavior. So antinomianism is a Gnostic practice of viewing everything physical as inherently evil and unredeemable. The physical, the flesh, the matter in this world is inherently evil and unredeemable. But the spiritual can't be touched by even the evil flesh. The spirit is completely separate. And so often these people would live out very fleshly lives and ignore the moral law because they figured the flesh is evil anyway. It's unredeemable. There's nothing to do about it. So just fulfill it. Because that's the way it's made. That's the way it's designed. This was the logic of these type of people. That's why it's called a heresy. It's not true. But, that's what they did. Scholars have now attested to an early presence of Manichaean images in Hira. This French guy shows that in Hira there were actually other source material that shows that there was Manichaeans there as well. So other source material referenced by this scholar has Manichaeans in Hira, like it shows, like Al-Kalbi said. So you have non-Islamic sources also attesting to their presence there, and Al-Kalbi says, "Hey, they're Quraysh." So we have Manichaean Gnostics as part of the Quraysh tribe. That's where Muhammad gets Gnosticism in the Quran. So it's pretty clear to me that that's how it is. These are some characteristics of Mani. I don't see the need to go too much into it. You see it there if you want to read it. There's just some similarities between Mani's titles and what eventually became Muhammad's titles. Mani's called the Apostle of Light. Muhammad's the Apostle of Allah. This idea of apostle, was Mani borrowed from the word, the idea from the Gospels, and then Gnosticized them, of course. And then Manichaeans in Muhammad's tribe were using that term. Therefore, Muhammad uses the term for himself. So he derives it from what he's hearing, not necessarily from special revelation. So, some of that. So, what are some Manichaean Gnostic beliefs? And then I'm going to show you true Gnosticism here in a second. So, Gnostic beliefs are very dualistic. That's why I went over just the physical versus the spiritual, flesh versus like matter, the physical, versus spiritual being something separate. I'm going to show you why that is in a second. And then the true knowledge of the difference between the two and how they're so separate from each other is what leads to salvation in these Gnostic belief systems. So rather than show this is just kind of showing the kind of simplistic Manichae way of looking at it. I'll show you the kind of the breakdown in a minute. I think I'm going to, where it says there, I'm going to go here. And I'll go backwards. This is where I want to go to next. So Gnostic borrows from earlier Christian semantics, but redefines them. So Gnostic teaches this dualistic idea, and it derives it from this kind of cosmology, let's call it, or this idea that before anything was created that we know, you have this father of all called Bythus, and he spawns a bunch of spiritual entities called aeons. And all the different aeons make up what's called the pleroma. And the pleroma is called the fullness. That's what the word means in Greek. So it's this idea that all the spiritual entities, and they came in male-female type pairs, and they spawned from the father of all called Bythus. The first was called nous or monogenes. Okay, monogenes is the same word we get. So this is borrowed from, because this came later, which I'll show in a second. Gnostic beliefs and terminologies and ideas came second to the gospel, the original 4 gospels in the New Testament. This came second. Gnostic came second to it, after it. Monogenes is where we get the word begotten, where Christ is called the only begotten Son of God. That word is monogenes, which means mono, which means only, or solo, mono, one. And genes means like a kind, like genus and species. So it's like one of a kind, monogenes, one of a kind. So when you say Jesus is the one of a kind Son of God, it means like we're all sons of God, all as humans, but Jesus is special. He's not just a human. He's beyond human. He's divine, one of a kind, Son of God. Where Son of God is more of like a metaphor. It's like a way to describe his relationship to the Father within the Godhead. That's why monogenes is used. That's the word from which begotten comes from. So begotten is not the greatest translation into English. The best translation would be one of a kind. Okay? Well, they take this idea and they corrupt it. This is what happens with Gnosticism. It's a corruption of the original truth. Okay? Nous ultimately spawns Christ the Son and the Holy Spirit. Sophia comes down the line as the 12th. She wants to know, why am I down here? I want to know the Father in his fullness. And in a fit of confusion, fear, bewilderment, negative emotions, in her attempt to be like the Father, she falls out of grace into this halfway state. And they call it her passion. As part of her fall, there's this Jesus figure, who's another one of these aeons, that, again, they're taking these New Testament semantic words and redefining meaning. That's all that's happening. It's like Star Wars does now compared to Star Wars in the 80s. So Star Wars in the 80s was, late 70s and 80s, was its own thing. That was true Star Wars. And then 30 years later, they try to make the episode 7, 8, 9 and everything else Disney's tried to do. And it says Star Wars, and it says Luke Skywalker as this old geezer whose character looks nothing like the original Luke. And all that matters is the original Luke, not the new Luke. You call him Luke, but he's not Luke. That's not Luke Skywalker. That's something else. But it ain't Luke Skywalker. That's the same thing here. This came along after, 100 years after Jesus and the Gospels, and redefine everything. Redefine what words, so don't get caught up in these words. But she falls, okay, and she produces something that's called animal, and it's called the demiurge, or demiurge. It's not part of the pleroma, but it's this other thing that comes from her. And it's from her negative emotions, confusion, fear, bewilderment. She produces this demiurge. And the demiurge creates the known universe as we see it, as we know it. Creates the earth, the human bodies, the animals, the trees, the ground, all that stuff. That's created by the demiurge. And so the demiurge is considered the Old Testament God, Yahweh. But he's a negative being. He's a selfish being. He's capricious. He doesn't even know his origin. He thinks he's the only one. He thinks he's the only God, but little does he know he's a created thing. That's what Gnostics taught. And there was this mid-2nd century Gnostic named Marcion. First century is 0 to 99. Second century is 100 to 199. So if it's got a 1 on it, it's the 2nd century. If it's got a 2 on it, it's the 3rd century, etc. So Marcion decided he didn't like any reference to the Old Testament God in the New Testament, so he hacked it up. And he took pieces of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the original 4 Gospels. He did not take pieces of the new Gospels, the new made-up Gnostic Gospels. He didn't take those because they didn't exist yet, is my point. They didn't start getting written until about the time of Marcion is when those new Gospels showed up. The original 4 Gospels were all written in Greek, all in the 1st century. Nobody questions that. So, just to get to that point, everybody admits that the 4 Gospels were written within decades of Jesus' life, and some people criticize it and say, within decades. But the point is, it's still within the lifespan of the original guys whose name are on the books. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, those guys whose names are on the books, they were actually alive at the time those books are written. So it doesn't really matter that it was 10, 20, 30 years after Jesus. They're human beings that recall things and took notes and had things down on paper or in their brains, and they can reproduce them years later. People can do it. I can do it. I was in med school 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I reproduce things now that I knew then. I have notes now that I refer back to even now. I could rewrite my entire med school experiences 30 years later, right now, and they'd be accurate because I'm still freaking alive. So same thing goes to the 1st century. So it's bullshit to say that these gospel writers would have forgotten crap or not understood or remembered things. They're still freaking alive. So they are the original writers of the 4 Gospels. They are. Accept it. It's reality. Okay? Those guys either believe what they say or you don't believe what they say. But they did say it. That stuff is there. It's been preserved. And so later on, people like this come along. And now, he didn't have the new writings yet, so he took the old writings. This is a well-known thing. Look up Marcion. He took the old writings, the first 4 Gospels, and hacked them up to take the Old Testament God out of it, any reference out of it. When this guy did that, he was thank you, Marcion, because you attest to 2 things. Number 1, you tested that those are the original writings, and you got to make them fit the way you want it to fit with your Gnosticism. That's new. That wasn't informing the original writers. So secondly, you proved that your stuff is new, and your stuff is the second thing. This is why scholars kind of like admit to the fact that this Gnostic crap came later. But he's an example of it. So I'm bringing all that up because I got into the demiurge, who's the maker of the physical world. If the physical world, according to the Gnostic, is part of all this bewilderment and nonsense and Sophia falling out of grace and creating this demiurge, then the physical world is inherently evil because they call the demiurge evil. And she separates herself from this fallen state as this entity called Achamoth. And so Achamoth is called the mother of the demiurge. It's a piece of Sophia. So that's the creation of the demiurge. Now, Irenaeus, who's a Christian, writing in 180 AD after all this, yet these are all different Gnostic thinkers throughout the second century. Until you get to Irenaeus, he has to deal with all this crap later on. And he calls it against heresies, and it's all dealing with 100 years of dumbasses. And he has to deal with it, okay? And when he deals with it, he tears them apart. I have the book written by him from 180 AD. And he tears them apart. Take into account, you have a bunch of Christian writers from the 2nd century who quote the Old Testament and New Testament word for word that we have now. So, and that comes out of the 2nd century. Not even original manuscripts. Don't matter. It's from guys that read the original manuscripts and quoted them exactly how they are now. So you could reconstruct 90% of the New Testament. This is a fact. From the writings of guys like Irenaeus that quoted from it. Nobody changing crap. Nobody's changing anything. So they're quoting straight from it. And it's the same as now. And you could reproduce it. You could put it together like a puzzle piece. And you get the same New Testament you have now. From the quotations from the Christian fathers from the 2nd century onward. But Irenaeus writes, and hence they declare material substance had its beginning from ignorance and grief and fear and bewilderment, and thus material substance is bad. Man then receives his spirit, which is called the divine spark, from a new restored Sophia. And so she protects humanity from the demiurge by giving us a spirit. This is where the spirit comes from the pleroma, from these heavenly entities that are outside of the creation, physical creation of the demiurge, which in their mind gives us a one-up on the demiurge. This is where all New Age teaching comes from. It's that, hey, if you meditate and if you reach your internal self and you come into contact with spirit beings from beyond, then you can overcome the flesh and transcend reality into the heavenlies, outside of the need for God or redemption. There is no sin because you can't help but sin. It can't be called sin anymore because you can't help it. You're in a material flesh that was created from the falling of her, the Sophia, and made by this idiot called the demiurge. I call him idiot because in Aramaic there's a word used, saklos, for the demiurge, which means the fool. He's also called Yaldabaoth, meaning child or son of chaos, and Samael, meaning venom or poison of God. That's what they thought of the Old Testament God, the creator God. Now, of course, this is all fake. This is all untrue. This is all 2nd century bullshit. But it is what it is. So we have to deal with it, and it's what informs later occult teachings down the centuries that we're still dealing with today. Do you want any of this to be in your holy book? No, you don't. Because it says you can sin all you want and it's okay because you can't help it. You're going to transcend it through meditation and trying to come into contact with these spirit beings from beyond. But all that's evil and actually demonic. So if stuff like that is drawn from this material written by these idiots, and it appears in a book that you call a holy book, it's not holy anymore. That's the way it is. I'm being rough, but I'm just tired of it. I think I just gave up. I think I just decided I don't care anymore. Because I think we're in the end times. And until we all start standing up and saying the truth, what good are we doing to the world anyway? Where all this come from? So I'm kind of going through my slides hit or miss here, but so Gnostic literature comes from this discovery in Egypt in 1945 at Nag Hammadi, which was, this isn't a discovery that's close to this area called Nag Hammadi, and you have all this Gnostic material that came out of that. Most of these are written in Coptic and date to the 4th century. Okay, so that's like the 300s AD. That's the 4th century. Most of them date to the 4th century. Now, they're supposedly older than that. Now, okay, maybe we can get it back. I don't think it goes any earlier than the 2nd century. Some people swear to God they've got to be written in Greek eventually, but no one's ever discovered a Greek manuscript of these things. They're all in Coptic. So I'm assuming they were never written in Greek, because Greek kind of started falling out of favor in the 2nd century anyway. We do have the language of the original New Testament preserved into the 2nd century. We have 18 fragments written in Greek that date to almost the 1st century. We have a fragment of John that dates to 125 AD called the John Rylands manuscript. And I think it has John 18, if I recall correctly. And it is word for word like we have it now. And it's a fragment. But if you have a fragment, and the way the words are spaced looks like the whole page would be what we have now, then we basically have the book of John from 125 AD. And if you have the book of John from 125 AD, and it was written in 95 AD or so, then we have a piece of John 30 years removed from the original. That's amazing. We have a bunch of fragments that date that early. And then we have 5,800 Greek manuscripts that come from the first few centuries after Jesus. So I kind of wanted to go over kind of the history. So this is what we're dealing with Gnosticism. So it looks like, so wait a minute. I don't want to miss kind of where I reference some of this. Sorry if this is dizzying to you. Like I said, these were the original Gnostic thinkers from the 2nd century. It seems that the earliest Gnostic writings, such as the Gospel of Thomas, it didn't date to any earlier than 135 AD. So it's almost a universal conclusion of modern scholarship that the formalized Gnostic ideas and writings did not date back to the 1st century. They were all 2nd century onward. So the Gnostic, if you take a Gnostic writing and reference and put it in the Qur'an, then you have put in something that's not true. That's inherently fake, because it's done after the fact. It's using Christian ideas and corrupting them. So you're putting the corruption in the Qur'an rather than fixing the corruption. You say the Qur'an says that the Christians and the Jews have corrupted their scriptures, and then you decide to take the corruption that existed and validate it in the Qur'an. You've just done the opposite of what you claim to do, which is fix the corruption. So it just boggles my mind that this is actually a thing still. So books that end up appearing in the Quran are these, and I'm going to show you where. So we went over that already. So let's get to it. Let's get to where the rubber meets the road here. So I'm going to read you from the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, written circa 180 AD. This is just from modern scholarship. It's the way it is. This is when it was written. Infancy Gospel of Thomas, section 2. Having made some soft clay, this is not in the original 4 Gospels. The first time this crazy story appears is in 180 AD. When did Jesus live? He lived, in my opinion, he was born 2 BC and he died in 33 AD. And the Gospel's written in the 50s, 60s, if not 90s AD. That's when the original 4 Gospels are written. Anything else that has the word gospel on it is just a copy, like putting Star Wars on something now, when it has nothing to do with the original. Same idea. So having made some soft clay, he fashioned out of it 12 sparrows. And it was the Sabbath when he did these things. And there were also many other children playing with him. And a certain Jew, seeing what Jesus was doing, playing on the Sabbath, it wasn't even a problem. So this is obviously written by an idiot in 180 AD who doesn't know what it means to break the Sabbath or not. It's not even a thing. It's not even a thing that Pharisees had a problem with. A kid playing on the Sabbath. It's not a breaking. But so this goofball writer later on, over 100 years later, is trying to introduce this idea that playing on the Sabbath as a child is somehow a breaking of it. So, behold, thy son is at the stream and has taken clay and made of it 12 birds and has profaned the Sabbath. And Joseph coming to the place and seeing, cried out to him, "Wherefore dost thou on the Sabbath what is not lawful to do?" And Jesus clapped his hands and cried out to the sparrows and said to them, "Off you go." And the sparrows flew and went off crying. And the Jews seeing this were amazed and went away and reported to their chief men that they had seen Jesus. What had they seen him doing? That's a ridiculous story. Like, anybody would care about what a child's doing, playing, and then really thinking that he turned birds from clay into real birds, clay birds into real birds. But that's the story. So it's this, you saw a lot of times in the 2nd century and thereafter, people trying to write stories about Jesus' early life, since there's such little about it in the New Testament. So they're trying to spice it up. They're trying to make stories because they're bored. And so they started, people like to talk up the new stuff and the stuff that sounded kind of interesting, and provided the holes in the the narrative that they were missing. They're trying to spice it up, like I said. So people talk about the spice more than they would the original. So stories like this would be, I'm sure, talked about a lot in the area. So Surah 349 has this story. Allah will make him, Jesus, a messenger to the children of Israel, saying, "I have come to you with a sign from your Lord, that I designed for you out of clay, as it were the figure of a bird, and breathe into it, and it becomes a bird by Allah's leave." Now, the Quran's like couching this as if it's happening later in his life. Like you wouldn't realize this is a infancy thing, like a childhood thing. But this was in his childhood, playing as a child originally. And the Quran just acts like Jesus decided in adulthood to do this. But, it's derived from this. It does not come from the original 4 Gospels. And so it's derived from a Gnostic gospel. The infancy gospel of Thomas is a Gnostic gospel. Because even though I'm not showing you the whole gospel, it is, its messaging is very Gnostic throughout it. So the source material is in question. You shouldn't be deriving a story from a bad source when it's not in the original source. And then there's another one, the Arabic infancy gospel of the Savior. It's another infancy gospel. There's a bunch of these. This word should not be attached to them, but it is, as a way to validate. So if you've got something that's got like if you want to make something sound legit, and this original source, you're going to take that thing and say, that's what this is too. And you're going to put that word on it, on your thing, to make it sound legit, to try to get people to believe it. That doesn't mean anything. It's just you're attaching that word to it later in time. All we need to do is have scholarship show us when things showed up. Then you can say, well, that borrowed from that. So that's using the term gospel to bring validity to it. But that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it's actually gospel, Injil, whatever. It's false. And it's well attested to now. So this is written in the 5th, 6th century AD, by the way. Really late. Jesus spake even when he was in the cradle, and said to his mother, "Mary, I am Jesus, the Son of God. That word which thou didst bring forth according to the declaration of the angel Gabriel to thee." So here we have Jesus speaking in the cradle. Okay? So if this is Arabic, written in Arabic, somewhere in the 5th century AD, and it may have been in Syriac, but in Syriac, or in Arabia, even in Arabia, people could read Syriac. And so even though the source material is Syriac, the oral tradition would be in Arabic, because that's what everybody spoke as a community. But when you're reading like high-level material and books, they're in Syriac, because that's the language of the day. Just like English is the language of the day now. And so you'll have people all over the world talk in their own native language, but if they're going to a scientific conference, it's always in English, no matter where you are. So if you have a religious text, it's going to be in Syriac, but you're going to talk about it in your native language. That's what's going on here. Our earliest actual copies of it are from the 1200s in Arabic, but it dates back to its original writing in the 5th, 6th century by modern scholarship. So that would have predated Muhammad, who was 7th century, because he was writing the Quran in the early 600s, which is the 7th century. So prior to it, this was roaming around and would have been a common story because it was the new spice, all right, that Jesus spoke in the cradle. Look, 500 years after this stuff was actually written and it actually happened. Jesus is 2 BC to 33 AD. And this is 500 years later. Keep that in your head. That's important. Because too many people don't have a grasp of history and where things fall on a timeline. So 500 years later, suddenly you're coming with the idea that he spoke in a cradle when there's no record of that prior, even in this stuff from the 2nd century. But this is what we choose to put in the Quran. He shall preach to men in his cradle and in the prime of manhood, and shall lead a righteous life. This is Surah 346. We're making reference to the only place that shows up Arabic infancy gospel. And there's some other sources too that are also way late, but this is the main one. In Surah 19, Mary goes into labor alone. Well, of course, the New Testament, Joseph's with her, and she's eventually the shepherds show up and all that. But in the Quran, Mary's all by herself, no one around her, and gives birth to Jesus under a palm tree, which itself I'm going to show something about. She then gets hungry and thirsty, and the newly born infant Jesus in her lap talks to her. Don't grieve, your Lord has placed a stream beneath you, and shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you. You will cause ripe dates to fall upon you. That's in verses 24 to 25 of this same Surah 19. So she went into labor. She gave birth to Jesus all by herself under the palm tree. She's upset. She's thirsty. All that blood loss. And Jesus talks to her and says, there's a stream right here. You can drink it, and you can get these dates right above you. In the same chapter of the Quran, Jesus speaks from the cradle as a newborn. The unbelievers who were doubting the prophet of Jesus at the time of his birth, how can we talk to one who was in the cradle, a young boy? Because Mary had mentioned it. He spoke, indeed, I am the slave of Allah. He has given me the book and has appointed me a prophet, which directly parallels this, but Islamicizes it. But it's the same thing. I am Jesus, Son of God, the word which thou didst bring forth according to the declaration of the angel Gabriel. Here, I am the slave of Allah. He has given me the book and has appointed me a prophet. So it just puts an Islamic spin on it, but it's the same story. And the source is 100 years prior to Muhammad, not 500 years prior. He picks that to put in the Quran. Interestingly, the idea that Mary and Jesus interacted with the palm tree also comes from a source from 600 to 625 AD. So he heard this just recently, not long after it was written, from something called the Apocryphal Pseudo-Gospel of Matthew. Well, pseudo gives you, at least they put the word pseudo this time on this thing, which means false. In the Pseudo-Gospel of Matthew, Mary and Joseph are already fleeing to Egypt with the not-so-infant. Now he's a few months old when Herod's trying to kill him, and they're fleeing to Egypt, and that's when they interact with this palm tree. Interestingly, in Surah 19, it says Mary's withdrawing him to a far place. Well, it's getting the idea of the Egypt flight, but putting it as if he's just born. Putting it as if he's just born right here. But either way, it kind of confuses the two competing stories between the Arabic infancy gospel of the Savior and the pseudo-gospel of Matthew. You're talking about this thing. So basically, Mary admires a palm tree laden with fruit but can't reach it. And the Christ child from Mary's lap, who's now like 6 months old, spoke to the palm tree, telling it to bend its branches. Here Jesus commands the palm tree, trying to get some miracles out of him from this story. This made-up piece of crap from the 600s. So that's where the palm tree idea comes from. But it's misplaced because it wasn't at the time of his birth. It was while he's running away to Egypt with his family. All in another. The whole thing's a made-up story, though. So what does it matter to me? I don't know. But anyway, let's move on. This idea that Jesus was not crucified, but someone took his place on the cross. That's in the Qur'an. We all know that. It's also in Gnostic writings, again. So this is coming from the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter. I want you to notice two things, okay? Irenaeus, number one, and his Against Heresies, gives us the most robust view of this idea. But I think the source material we've kind of lost to history. But the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter does preserve this idea, not quite as well written out as Irenaeus, which is also what you see here in Irenaeus is very clear in the Quran. Like Irenaeus and the Quran, like hand in hand, like they're telling the same story clearly. And Irenaeus assigns it to the Gnostic Basilids. Okay, so no surprise we might have lost his writings because he was one of the first ones. Let me go back. He's one of the first Gnostics. One of the first ones, okay? So no surprise we may have lost some of his writings, but Irenaeus, the Christian writer of Against Heresies, preserves it for us, all right? And the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter here, I'll read it first. The Savior said to me, "He whom you saw on the tree," which means the crucifixion, "glad and laughing, this is the living Jesus. But the one into whose hands and feet they drive the nails is his fleshly part." The dualistic, the docetism or dualism, it's the same idea. You have some part of Jesus that's glad and laughing while the other part's getting tortured, right? But this other part that the Gnostic is saying, that's not Jesus. The actual Jesus is this aeon thing that's in the pleroma. That's the actual Jesus. He's a spiritual only entity that has no physical. So the physical thing is just not him. So the one outside is laughing and is happy, no pain. But the one in whose hands and feet they drive the nails is his fleshly part, which is the substitute. There's someone being put as a substitute. He to be put to shame, the one who came into being in his likeness. But look at him and me, meaning me and him are two separate things. So it's this docetic, dualistic idea of bad physical. Whatever happens to it, happens. It's the physical. It's bad anyway. And the always and ever pure spiritual. So that's the Gnostic stuff in this Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter. Irenaeus really spells this out. So he's saying the Gnostic Basilids believe the following. This is not Irenaeus saying this is true. This is Irenaeus saying this is what Basilides believed. The Father sent his first begotten nous, he who it is called Christ. This is Bythus the Father, these aeonic beings I was talking to you about before, to bestow deliverance on those who believe in him from the power of those who made the world. He appeared then on earth as a man and wrought miracles. Wherefore he did not himself suffer death, but Simon, a certain man of Cyrene, being compelled, bore the cross in his stead, so that this latter, being transfigured by him, meaning Simon was transfigured into looking like Jesus, that he might be thought to be Jesus, was crucified through ignorance and error, while Jesus himself, the spiritual Jesus really, is what Irenaeus is saying, received the form of Simon and standing by laughed at him. Okay? So Simon has been turned in to look like Jesus, and Jesus has been made to look like Simon. Okay? The physical appearances. So this physical thing that walked the earth and wrought miracles that came from the heavenlies, that's this aeonic being who is called the Christ, comes in flesh, and what we see is just like an apparition. A lot of times, it's kind of how these Gnostics thought of Jesus. Like he looked physical, but really wasn't, because he's still this Christ figure from heaven. But in their idea, it's not the same Christ as what Christians say. It's this weird being that they've created in their own heads. That's just part of this pleroma. And this thing comes to earth and has a sheen of physical on him. But that sheen is not, we say, and the text of the Bible says, that he's fully man. That's why it calls him Son of Man. He's in every way a part of his nature a man. He has the nature of a human being, a man. And he's Son of God. He has the nature of God. Son of Man means nature of man. He's man. Son of God means nature of God. He's God. He's both God and man in one. That is what the New Testament, without a doubt, teaches. Okay? What these guys are saying is, no, he's not really physical at all. And so much so that when you try to nail him, we're not going to let him end up on the cross and die. That can't be, because he's not even really physical. So we're going to change Simon of Cyrene, who in the Bible carried the cross of Jesus because Jesus was so weak. They take that figure and they change the story, and they say Simon is now being forced by spirit beings to make himself look like Jesus. And that's who they nail. They nail Simon because they think it's Jesus still. And then Jesus takes the physical appearance of Simon and is not nailed. And he stands by and does this weird thing again. He laughs. Glad and laughing, glad and laughing. And I think it's just trying to say, in a really weird way, that he's not worried at all. He has no concern. He's a happy-go-lucky. This story is exactly what's in the Qur'an. And because of their Jews saying in boast, we killed Messiah Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, they killed him not, nor did they crucify him. But the resemblance of Jesus was put over another man. Now, if the Quran had any sense, it would have remembered that it's Simon that it's trying to say was put over the other man, but it couldn't remember the name. So it just says another man. And they killed that man. And those who differ therein are full of doubts. They have no certain knowledge. They follow nothing but conjecture, for surely they killed him not. So the Quran is clearly saying that they took the other man and killed him because it looked like Jesus. The physical appearance was made to appear like Jesus. And they thought all along they were killing Jesus, but ha ha ha, almost like laughter, they were not. They were not, it says. So it's denying the crucifixion of Jesus, just like these Gnostics did. This corruption of Christianity denied the crucifixion. And even in the New Testament, it says, anyone who comes along and denies that Jesus came in the flesh, this is in the book of James, that one is of the Antichrist. It is Antichrist to deny that Jesus came in the flesh. And that's what this is doing. So the book of James anticipated the coming of Gnosticism and anticipated the coming of, the appearance of Gnosticism in the Quran. This idea. So, it's a problem. It's taking 2nd century Gnostic teachings that did not originate in the 1st century, did not originate in the original gospel, do not date to that time. Every scholar knows it. They know that it dates to the 2nd century, as Irenaeus shows, who is 2nd century. And it puts it in there as if it's true. But its source is clearly not out of heaven. It's not just something, wow, where did that come from? No, it came from this writing. And this writing's bunk. So this is bunk. It's the way it is. It's a problem. And rather than fighting against corruption, the Quran has adopted corruption. The opposite of what it's claiming to do. Okay. Mary in the temple until age 12. And chosen by Lot to marry Joseph. This is in the Qur'an, and it's also in the Proto-Evangelium of James, written about 140 AD. This is an apocryphal text. But a lot of these apocryphal texts had Gnostic underpinnings. So this is 2nd century. Her parents went down marveling and praising the Lord God because the child had not turned back, and Mary was in the temple of the Lord as if she were a dove that dwelt there. And she received, this is like nothing in, this is not in the New Testament at all. And she received food from the hand of an angel. So fantastical. And when she was 12 years old, there was held a council of priests, so she lived there for 12 years in the temple, saying, "Behold, Mary has reached the age of 12 years in the temple of the Lord. What then shall we do with her, lest perchance she defile the sanctuary of the Lord?" And then the priest said, "You have been chosen by lot to take into your keeping the virgin." So there was a lot process in it, and she goes to live with Joseph as a virgin. And it's not until the age of 16 that he comes back and finds her still a virgin. So at 16, she is pregnant with by the Holy Spirit in this version of reality, of false reality. None of this is real. But anyway, this was written 100 years after Jesus. 100 years. Jesus died in 33 AD. This was written 100 years later by no one who was still alive then. There's no one still alive from then here at this time to say, no, that's not what happened. How convenient, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's when this stuff shows up. When no one can say, no, that's not true. No, I was there. That's bullshit. There's no one that's around able to do that. There's no one to call BS. That's all you need to know. Come on, grow a brain. Surah 344, you were not with them when they cast lots with their pens as to which of them should be charged with the care of Mary, nor were you with them when they disputed. It's borrowing it from this story. That doesn't come from the Old Testament, or from the New Testament, and it doesn't come from the heavens. It comes from this story that he heard among all these crazy Quraysh Christians that were Manichaeans. That's where he got this stuff. All right, we're going to move to the next crazy story. It's one after the other, I hate to tell you. I have a pile of these. And we're going to go through all of them, probably over the next 45 minutes. All right, so this is borrowed from one of the homilies of Jacob of Sarug. A homily is a commentary that follows a reading of Scripture, given as kind of an explanation, usually as an intentional allegory. Like, this is not meant to be a real story, even from its original writing. It's like Pilgrim's Progress. I don't know if you know that story. Like, there's these intentional kind of allegorical stories that were written by Christians that you read after you read Scripture in order to bring it to life, show a picture story of what it was talking about. This was written in Syriac, readily available in Arabia, and probably written between the 5th and 6th century. So, according to Jacob, the story goes, in the reign of the Emperor Decius, 7 noble young Christians of Ephesus fled from persecution and took refuge in a cave not far from the city. This was during intense persecution by this emperor. After a time, their enemies discovered where they were and blocked up the entrance to the cave, leaving them to die of hunger. When Theodosius II was on the throne 196 years later, a herdsman found and opened the cave. These guys had been sleeping for all this 196 years. They then awoke from their slumber in which they had remained that entire time and sent one of the party to the city to purchase provisions. He, to his amazement, found Christianity everywhere triumphant. At a shop where he bought some food, he produced a coin of Decius to pay for it. Accused of having discovered a hidden treasure, he told the story of himself and his companions. They're like, where did you get this coin of Decius from 200 years ago? And he's like, okay, I'm going to tell you the story. We were up in a cave and we fell asleep. So he led the way to the cave. The appearance of his companions, still young and radiant with celestial brightness, proved the truth of his story. The emperor soon heard of it and went in person to the cave, where the awakened sleeper told him that God had preserved them in order to prove to him the truth of the immortality of the soul. Having delivered their message, they died. So this story was meant to convey the idea that Christians under persecution just need patience and long suffering, and eventually things will work out. And if not, at least in the heavenlies, there's a future. There's a future heaven. And have some long suffering and some patience. Things do eventually change. When you're at your worst, remember, things will change. And in this case, you went from a pagan empire to a Christian empire. So it's just a fantastical, legendary story made as a story on purpose. No one thought it was real. I promise you, no one thought this was a real story, even when it was written. In Surah 18, it's written as if it is real. Do you think that the people of the cave and the inscription were a wonder among our signs? Remember when the young men fled for refuge from their disbelieving folk to the cave, they said, "Our Lord, bestow on us mercy from yourself and facilitate for us our affair in the right way." Therefore, we covered up their sense of hearing, causing them to go into a deep sleep in the cave for a number of years. Then we raised them up from their sleep that we might test which of the two parties was best at calculating the time period that they had tarried. We narrate unto you, O Muhammad, their story with truth. We awakened them from their long sleep, that they might question one another. A speaker from among them said, "How long have you stayed here?" They said, "Maybe a day or part of a day." They said, "Your Lord alone knows how long you've stayed here. So send one of you with this silver coin, the coin of Decius, from the story of Jacob of Sarog. Here it is again, a silver coin, to the town, and let them find out which of you is the good, lawful food, and bring some of that to you." Some say there were 3, the dog being the 4th. Okay. There's some question about how many of them there were. In the original story, there's 7. But I think that was lost on some of the people in Muhammad's environs. They couldn't remember how many there were, and that became an issue. So he's having to deal with it in the Quran verse, the fact that we don't know how many there are. Some say there were 3, the dog being the 4th. Some say there were 5, the dog being the 6th. Others say there were 7, the dog being the 8th. So say, my Lord knows best their number. None of them but a few. So debate not about their number, except with the clear proof, which we have revealed to you. And consult not any of them, people of the scripture, Jews and Christians, about the affair of the people of the cave. And they stayed in their cave 300 solar years and add 9 for lunar years. So here it's 300 years. But it's the same story. And maybe there's 4, 5, 6, or 7, maybe 8. We don't know if you add a dog to the number or not, because that was a dispute going on. And this is from the life of Muhammad, the occasion that landed the story in the Quran, from Ibn Ishaq. Life of Muhammad, just a translation of Ibn Ishaq. This is from him, Ibn Ishaq. When Arabs decided to test Muhammad with the story of the cave, and to see if he knew about it, and if he could clear up the debate regarding the number of sleepers, as you can see being addressed in the surah. This is because the legend existed in different forms. It took Muhammad 2 weeks to research the story, and then at the end claim inspiration that it was true. He's saying it's true. Some people believe the Arabs were testing him. Like the Christian Arabs were testing him because they knew it was a homily. They knew it wasn't even true. And they wanted to find out if he would come back and say God told him it was true. Because they knew the source was a total homily. And so there's some texts that say they were laughing, or they were making fun of him because he acted like God gave it to him. And now I look at it and I know the source of it, and yeah, it's kind of funny. Sorry. And then it didn't even clear up how many there were. Like, that was kind of the whole point. And he didn't even clear it up. You can look it up, pages 136 to 138. Ibn Ishaq. So this story of the cave is this Christian homily. It just is. That's where it comes from. And it's attesting to it as if it's a historical fact, when everybody knows it's a made-up homily. As is the next thing. So you have this legend about Alexander the Great. In the Quran, he's called Du al-Qarnayn, the two-horned one. That's what that Arabic means. the two-horned one. And these stories about these stuff about Alexander the Great in the Quran comes from the Syriac Alexander legend. Syriac again. The lingua franca of the 5th and 6th century. The language of the day. Lingua franca of the 5th and 6th century. Syriac legend of Alexander. So it's made up in the 5th and 6th century by Christians who have an agenda. So again, it's a corruption. It's a corruption. Yes. If you're coming to correct corruption, don't put the corruption in the thing that's supposed to correct it. That's just like basic 101. How to correct corruption. Don't put the corruption in the thing that you're using to correct the corruption. So this is an early 6th century, 500s AD Christian legend detailing the exploits of Alexander the Great. The whole reason this thing was made up was to have this guy be this almost model of a Christian emperor, which he wasn't. Alexander the Great was the Greek emperor, Greek king from like 300s BC, not AD. And he was just a vile, self-serving homosexual. That's what he was. And he conquered the world within like 10 years. And he died like at the age of 30, 33 or something. He was young. And he was a heathen. But in this story, he becomes this noble emperor that is almost a prophet. And it was written to give him two prophecies. That this Byzantine Empire in the 500s AD, who was commissioning this story to be written, they were about to go launch some attacks on like barbarians in the north. And they were gonna think Ukrainian type area. But they're gonna launch attacks against barbarians. So they wanted this story about Alexander the Great to contain a prophecy that said, hey, this Alexander the Great story, he gave this prophecy and we're about to fulfill it. So get on board. This is a God thing because God gave the prophecy to Alexander the Great. We just discovered it in his writing. Hey, how convenient. That's what this story was. It was just a propaganda tool so the Christian Empire could do its battle and get people on board. And then later on, during the reign of Justinian, they did another battle, which was to fulfill this, be the second prophecy. Well, what am I talking about? Okay, the Syriac Alexander legend, in it, he promises to God that he will rule the world. He gathers an army in Egypt and travels to the fetid sea, but is not able to cross it. Remember this term, fetid. Fetid. Instead, he finds the window of heaven. It's almost like a portal. It allows him to travel from the place where the sun sets to the place where the sun rises in this fantastical legend that was written in the 500s AD by idiots. In the region of the sunrise, he travels to the Caucasus and sets up camp near a mountain pass, only to be informed that he is now in the domain of the Persian Emperor. He learns that beyond the mountain pass are barbarian tribes that were associated with the Huns that the Byzantines were trying to deal with. And then the story associates them with Gog and Magog, which are their two kings, which is derived itself from Ezekiel. Ezekiel in the Old Testament has a prophecy about Gog and Magog. Nothing to do with what this is. But this story takes that material and legendizes it into a legend about Alexander the Great. So he gets there. Deciding to seal up their entryway through the mountains, he tasks his blacksmiths and metalworkers from Egypt to construct an iron and bronze wall, locking these guys in. He's trying to lock the Huns in. Okay? Behind this mountain pass, between two mountains, by putting an iron and bronze wall to lock them in. back in the time of Alexander the Great, in the 300s BC. Later, the Persian emperor learns of Alexander's presence. He advances an army against Alexander, but the advance is miraculously revealed to Alexander, who then proceeds to defeat the emperor despite his numerical disadvantage. After victory, Alexander travels and prays in Jerusalem, and finally returns to Alexandria, Egypt. All right. Back to these Huns locked behind the bronze wall. At this time, Alexander in the story reveals 2 prophecies. So he locks them behind this wall, and that's where the 2 prophecies come. And he says, in the future, these barbarians are going to penetrate this wall and bring about a world war that will then bring about the apocalypse, the end times, the ultimate return of, he didn't know then because he's Alexander the Great, but the return of Jesus. Now the Byzantine Empire says, oh, we're going to go fight these Huns right now. They're the guys that were behind the wall. They just broke through. We got to go deal with them. This is the prophecy that Alexander was talking about. They're breaking through the wall. Now we got to deal with them. And guys, that means the end times are coming and Jesus is going to come back. So get on board. We're about to bring about the end times. You know, it's kind of what the Iranian, not people, but regime, the Shias are trying to do. Bring about the end times by causing war over there. It's the same idea here. All just on false stories that aren't even real. The Iranian regime believes in a 12th Imam hiding in the wilderness. That ain't real. Same unreal thing here. These guys are hiding behind a wall. So that's what I'm kind of bringing up there. Where do I get this? From stuff like this. I'm actually reading books from scholars. I'm not making this stuff up. So let's see. This is just some of the detail. I kind of summarized it already. I don't want to. You can just read that if you want. Why the 2-horned one? I'm going over all this, and we're going to show it in the Qur'an, because all this stuff's in the Qur'an. Everything I just said. Why the 2-horned one? The horns of Alexander are described twice in this legend. The first is during a prayer of Alexander, and I have it quoted here. King Alexander bowed and worshipped, saying, O God, master of kings and judges, you who raise up kings and dismiss their power, I perceive with my mind that you made me great among all kings, and that you caused horns to grow on my head, so that I may gore with them the kingdoms of the world. Give me the power of the heavens of your sanctity, so that I may receive strength greater than the kingdoms of the world. And I will humiliate them and glorify your name forever, O Lord. So here he is perceived as some God-fearing king, which he wasn't. But, God gives him 2 horns. So the 2-horned one, Dul Qarnayn. That's why he's called that. So clearly, the Quran's getting it from this legend of Alexander, Syriac legend of Alexander. And it's got the 2-horned one because it describes him as 2 horns. So the source material is what it is. This is it. Another reference. I made you great among all kings, and I caused the horns of iron to grow on your head. Same thing. Okay? All this provides the context and explains the presence of these legendary stories that appear in the Quran. But they appear in the Quran as if absolute historical fact, when we know that they're just corruptions written by dumb Christians. So if you want to expunge Christian corruption, you don't do it by including Christian corruption. Let that sink in. Oh no, I'm being tracked. Surah 18. And they ask you about Dul Qarnayn. Say, I shall recite to you something of his story. This is the Quran. Verily, we established him in the earth, and we gave him the means of everything. So he followed away until when he reached the setting place of the sun. The setting place of the sun. That's not even scientifically accurate. But that's not even... Oh, because it's from this crazy story back when they thought the earth was flat. And they thought the earth had a setting place over there somewhere way off. And of course, the guy that conquered the known world would have found the setting place of the sun, right? So he found it. He found it setting in a spring of black, muddy, or hot water. Black, muddy water. I wonder what the word fetid means. Guess what that means? That means dark, poisonous. Or like not moving too much and it's kind of like stagnant and it's full of harmful stuff. Bacteria, stuff like that. Poisonous. Fetid. So that's directly from the Syriac story of Alexander, the Syriac legend of Alexander. He found the sun, so it's straight out of that. There's no like higher allegorical meaning here. It's coming straight out of that story. When he reached the setting place of the sun, he found it setting in a spring of black muddy water, and he found it near a people. We said, "Oh, two-horned one, either you punish them or treat them with kindness." Then he followed another way until when he came to the rising place of the sun, which is exactly what the Syriac story has Alexander do. He found it on a people whom we had provided no shelter against the sun. Then he followed another way until when he reached between two mountains, he found near them, these two mountains, a people who scarcely understood a word. Oh, they're barbarians, just like the Huns. Oh, he found some barbarians between two mountains, just like the Syriac legend of Alexander. And they said, "Hey, you got two horns. Verily, Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog, are doing great mischief in the land. Shall we then pay you a tribute in order that you may erect a barrier between us and them?" So he does that. He erects a barrier between them. He said, "That wealth, authority, and power in which my Lord has established me is better than your tribute. So help me with strength of men. I will erect between you and them a barrier. Give me pieces, blocks of iron." Then when he had filled up the gap between the two mountain cliffs, he said, "Blow." Till when he had made it red as fire, he said, "Bring me molten copper." So iron and copper, it's like bronze, just like the Greeks used bronze, right? To pour over it. So the Yajuj and Majuj, were made powerless to scale it or dig through it, i.e. Gog and Magog. The two-horned one said, "This is a mercy from my Lord." Oh, now he's the emperor that's kind of a prophet. Just like the other Christian legend. It's like a direct parallel everywhere. The sun setting in a muddy spring, which is not even scientifically possible. But they thought that's how they actually thought back then. That there's a flat earth and the sun did set on one side and was in a track that went to the other side. And he followed that track and got to the other side and found these idiots up in the north. And he put them behind a wall. And then he made a promise. He made a prophecy. But when the promise of my Lord comes, i.e. the prophecy, he shall level it to the ground, and the promise of my Lord is ever true. And on that day, this future day, this apocalyptic day, the day Gog and Magog will come out, we shall leave them to surge like waves on one another, and the trumpet will be blown. This is the end times. And we shall collect them all together, and on that day we shall present hell to the disbelievers, plain to view. So it's saying at the future apocalyptic times, these guys will get let out. So, first of all, this is all made-up story by Christian corruptors in the 500s. This story, word for word almost, but definitely concept for concept, ends up in the Qur'an. So it's a false story that ends up in the Qur'an about people that we know don't even exist right. This is about a future time. This is saying down the road in the future, even to Muhammad. Well, the end times hadn't come yet, right? And this stuff hadn't happened yet, so it's got to be future to us still. So somehow, somewhere in the Caucasus, there's a bunch of people trapped behind a wall that hasn't been broken down yet. And we know that's not true. There's no people trapped behind a wall in the Caucasus. Or up north, however far you want them. Because we have satellites. We know. These guys don't exist. It's all just it's just a story. It's a legend. It's not true history. It's not going to happen in the future. So what does that tell us? Is this from God? How could it be? No, it's from the 5th century Christian corruptors. And that's what ends up in the Quran. Over and over. It's a problem. Please wake up to that. So, next. I think I've said enough. about that. How about this one? It's not really Gnostic or Apocryphal here, but bringing it up because it's appealed to by Muslims, this statement, as if it makes Islam peaceful. But actually it does the opposite. And I'm going to tell you why. So Surah 532. Because of that. So because of what? Because of the murder of, it doesn't use the names Cain and Abel, but because of the murder of Abel by Cain, it's referencing the Bible story without coming up with the names of Cain and Abel. Because of this situation, we ordained for the children of Israel, El means, that's not Allah. El is the name of God in the Hebrew. That tells you right there that the Israelites didn't use the name Allah. But I'm told by that all the time. But even in the Qur'an, it admits that El, as part of Israel, means that they worshipped Elohim or Yahweh. So this is kind of a myth that they use the term Allah. Because of that, we ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone killed a person not in retaliation of murder or to spread mischief in the land, okay. If anyone kills a person, take this out. Not in the situation of murder retaliation. Not if they're a mischief spreader. But in other cases, it would be as if he killed all mankind. If anyone killed a person, it would be as if he killed all mankind. Except for, he's not killing all mankind if he's doing the death penalty for a good reason. Either for retaliation of murder or for people who spread mischief in the land. Okay. Now you got a problem. Now your nice little statement isn't nice at all. It's actually horrible. Because you made exceptions to this rule. Because of that, we ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone killed a person, but we got to have these exceptions. It would be as if he killed all mankind. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved all mankind. But this too is lifted without the exceptions. The original, which comes from the Mishnah, upon which is based Talmudic Judaism. The Mishnah comes after the time of Jesus. It's after the destruction of the temple, Second Temple, is when Talmudic Judaism started. And then the Mishnah is kind of the interpretation of the Talmudic oral law. The Talmudic Judaism is like trying to take the Torah, and now that we don't have the temple anymore because it's destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, now that we don't have that anymore, we got to somehow do Judaism without being able to do Judaism. So we got to have all this rabbinic, extra stuff that originated with the Pharisees, which Jesus had a problem with at his time, and just compounded itself with stupidity upon stupidity. But the Mishnah is kind of that written down transmission of this. And in the Mishnah it says, whoever destroys a single life is considered as if they had destroyed an entire world. Whoever saves a single life is considered as if they have saved an entire world. That's Mishnah Sanhedrin 4:5. Okay? So this in the Quran is not unique to the Quran. It's borrowed or lifted, plagiarized from here with an exception that ruins it. Why does it ruin it? Spread mischief. Okay. Real quick. We ordained for the children of Israel this statement, but this statement doesn't come from the Torah. It implies as if it's the Torah because you said children of Israel, but it comes from the Mishnah, which is just a couple hundred years before Jesus. Before Muhammad. 200 years after Jesus. So the Mishnah was created by Rabbinical Judaism 280 onward. So it was quite recent to the time of Muhammad, but doesn't date back to the children of Israel. Doesn't. And you lifted it from the Mishnah. And this is not in the Torah. So you can't say this. This is not factually true. So it's error. It's error in the Quran. The Quran says, bring a verse as good or better. And then that means the Quran's no good. If you can bring a better verse. That's its own challenge. I just brought a better verse. Because of that, we ordain for the Rabbinic Judaism, that'd be a better verse. Because it'd be more accurate. More accurate is better. Not more like how many words you use or how beautiful it sounds, which is all subjective anyway. Better would be accuracy. That's better. So, I did it. I brought a better verse. How about this? These caveats I'm calling. So, response to murder. So, like, you can still say this statement even if you kill a person in retaliation for murder. And you can still say this statement even if you kill a person for spreading mischief. What does that mean? Well, that's the worst part of this. Well, mischief in the land is well attributed by tafsirs that means like anybody that's pulling crap against Islam, like what I'm doing right now. I'm spreading mischief Islamically. I'm spreading mischief on earth in the land. If this was an Islamic land, which was, I'm going to show you, that's what it's, the land signifies, tafsir of this guy, which means commentary, Islamic commentary on the verse. The land signifies either the country or territory wherein the responsibility of establishing law and order has been undertaken by the Islamic State. So if I'm in an Islamic State, and I'm saying this in the Islamic State's land, I'm worthy of death. And if you killed me, it won't matter. It won't negate this statement. So it's okay to kill me under that circumstance. So we're back to terrorism then. So this does not absolve Islam from terrorism. It actually condones terrorism. I call terrorism if you're killing me for free speech. I'm openly speaking against the Quran. If you kill me because of it, that's terrorism. You call me spreading mischief in the land. But that's just a way to say you're being a terrorist if you kill me. And I've just about had it. If you want to kill me, do it. I don't care anymore. I honestly don't. So I kind of want to just, yeah, this is Surah 533. This is 533. This is 532. I get this quoted to me all the time. But the Quran says if you kill a person, you kill everybody. You kill all mankind. So the Quran doesn't condone killing. Well, except for retaliation and murder, except for spreading mischief in the land. Well, yeah, it does. Just read the whole damn verse. Don't lie to me. I don't take well when I get lied to. Sorry. It pisses me off to be lied to. And read me the next verse. The recompense for those who wage war against Allah and his messenger and do mischief in the land is only that they shall be killed or crucified or their hands and their feet fucking cut off or the opposite sides or be exiled from the land. I'll take that. This is their disgrace in the world. Yeah, I'm just not putting up with it. This is bullshit. All right. But this is in the Quran. This is in it. This is the verse after the nice verse. All right. Where does this story come from? Well, there's two things going on here. There's this verse, then it gets me into the story of Cain and Abel, which is also in Surah 5, which has its own drawing from apocryphal sources. We're just one compounded problem on top of another. Okay? This is all in the context of Cain's killing of Abel. Where Surah 5:27, so in Surah 5, it says, recite to them, the Jews, the story of the two sons of Adam in truth. And it goes on to describe the biblical story of Abel bringing the proper sacrifice, leaving out that proper sacrifice was an animal, and Cain bringing the sacrifice that was not accepted by God, leaving out, the Quran's leaving out that what's the nature of the problem of the sacrifice, that it was the fruit of the ground. So Cain brought fruit and vegetable crap and acted like that was good enough. and Abel brought the sacrifice of an animal. Why is that important? And why does the Quran leave out the most important part? Because the animal sacrifice is what would eventually lead to the fact that the Messiah had to come and be the lamb that was slain on the cross and be the ultimate substitute. The sacrificial system was just as a shadow and a picture, a type of what would come in Christ on the cross, that he would be the ultimate sacrifice. That's what the book of Hebrews is all about in the New Testament. I'd advise reading it. But in the meantime, you leave out the most important part of it, of Abel's sacrifice, that it was an animal. And the reason Cain's sucked is because it was fruit. So that's the issue there. It never mentions the names of them either. The latter said to the former, I will surely kill you. If you just said Cain and Abel, you wouldn't have to say the latter said to the former, which is starting to get confusing. I think a good verse would be, hey, I'll actually put their names in and make it really, really clear. So I'm bringing another verse that's better than what's in the Quran, because I'm actually going to contribute the names Cain and Abel. So that's just my opinion. Anyway. Let's see, Surah 531. Then Allah sends a crow who scratched the ground to show Cain how to hide the dead body of his brother. It says him. But I can't help it. I just get to put their names in to make it make more clarity, to make the verse better. Allah sent a crow who scratched the ground to show him how to hide the dead body of his brother. He, the murderer, said, woe to me, am I not even able to be as this crow and hide the dead body of my brother? Then he became one of those who regretted. Okay, this comes out of these guys. This strange apocryphal edition comes from the Midrash, which is its own, like the Midrash was like a commentary on the Mishnah. It's just like commentary upon commentary. It's just a bunch of like guys talking, making up stories. These guys thought, you know what? So here's the source material has a crow showing how to bury a dead body. Yeah. But it's not to Cain and Abel. It's not for Cain in the original story. It's for Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve come upon the dead body of their son and grieve him. And these guys, these 480 rabbis, are like, how did the first two humans learn how to bury their dead? I know. We'll make up a story about a crow that digs on the ground and shows them how to bury its own, like it buries its own crow. And Adam and Eve get the idea, oh, we can bury Abel now, that way. So the solution here in the Midrash is God sends a raven who, finding its own mate dead, dug in the ground and buried the body in front of Adam and Eve. Observing this action, Adam declared, we will do as the raven did. And he and Eve proceeded to bury Abel in the earth, thus performing the first human burial ritual. Yay, you came up with a story. Rabbinic Jews. You can tell I don't like additions. I don't like change and addition to the original. I don't like that. And so I have looked into it, and I'm only siding with the things that aren't changed. So when the Quran includes things that are changed, I know it's false. Because it's taking the change and putting it in. It's taking the corruption and putting it in. Rather than taking the original, it's denying the original and taking the corruption. That is a bad thing. I don't think that's a good thing. What I'm taking and what's in the original Gospels, 4 Gospels, is not the corruption. It's the original. We have too much ancient text material to show that from all sorts of sources. So here he got the story backwards. He put it as Cain trying to bury, but either way, the story is derived from these guys. Yalkut Shimoni and Perky Rabbi Eliezer. That's where the Quran's getting its source. From Rabbinic Jews, which the Quran hates. More Rabbinic Jews. Here we go. Another Midrashic reference. Abraham and Nimrod's fire. Which is goofball world here. So the biblical account of Nimrod places him not long after Noah's flood as a son of Cush, i.e. Noah's great-grandson, via Noah's son Ham. Noah, Ham, Cush, Nimrod. He is described as a mighty warrior and hunter, establishing powerful cities in Shinar, Mesopotamia, and Assyria. Shinar is Babylon, Nineveh is Assyria. And even in Micah 5:6 in the Bible, it calls Assyria the land of Nimrod. So that's what Nimrod is in Genesis. Later Jewish Mishnah literature places Nimrod as the builder of the Tower of Babel, though the Bible never states this. So the Mishnah adds to the Bible stories again. Okay? To me, that's corruption, when you add to the Bible. And we can look in history and time and know when corruption happens. So when I'm told, your Bible's corrupted, I'll say, well, the Bible itself is not corrupted, but yes, there are corruption stories that occurred after the Bible. Yes, there are corruption stories. I will give you that. They're not in the Bible. People didn't put them there. They put them in other writings. That corruption lands itself in the Qur'an. I'm showing it over and over again. That's my main theme here tonight. The Mishnah adds to the Bible stories again. Yet the Bible itself isn't changed. Okay. That's what I was just saying. So anyway, I'm going to get to it. Then the Mishnah has it, not only that he built the Tower of Babel, but he's alive still at the time of Abraham. So Abraham and Nimrod are like, if you look at the Genesis account, they've got to be several generations apart from each other. They can't be alive at the same time. Because Nimrod's like not long after, let's say 100 years after the flood of Noah. And then you've got maybe a few hundred years later, Abraham. So they can't be up on each other. But the Midrash Rabbah of the Jews, chapter 17, contains this story founded upon an ignorant blunder made by an ancient Jewish commentator in the Targum of Jonathan ben Uziel, where Abraham's home, Ur of the Chaldees, is commented on. So in ancient Sumerian, Ur means city. In Jerusalem, it's Yerushalayim, which means city, the city of peace, or city of God of peace. But Jonathan, this Jewish guy from the 400s AD, whenever this was, he had no familiarity with Sumerian. And Ur, to him, sounded like the Hebrew word light, which in Aramaic means fire. Real quick here, this is a Targum. So it's an Aramaic paraphrase or interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. Often these were in the first century. These Targums kind of came from the first century, actually. And Hebrew was declining as a spoken language, and Aramaic was like the common language of the people in the first century. And so you had these Targums appear, and they were interpreting the Hebrew in Aramaic. So the Aramaic word for Ur, i.e. the Hebrew word light, was fire. So he takes this Nimrod around the time of Ur and has the idea of fire attached to it. So he takes the phrase, talking about Abraham, it says in Genesis 15 that the Lord called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees. It says, I will call you Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees. He translates that furnace of fire because the word Ur in Aramaic sounds like fire. So it's a mistranslation. So it's corruption from the first century AD by idiot Jonathan ben Uziel, writing in his Targum. And he says, I am the Lord who brought thee out of the furnace of fire of the Chaldees. Makes no sense. Since you have a furnace of fire and you have Abraham coming out of a furnace of fire, he says that must be Nimrod. In his comment on Genesis 11, he writes, When Nimrod cast Abraham into the furnace of fire because he would not worship his idols, it came to pass that the fire was not given permission to injure him, which seems like borrowed from the 3 boys in the furnace from Daniel. It seems like he got all that confused, or almost like remade the story in the past here because his imagination went crazy. And this appears in the Qur'an. Crazy misinterpretation of the word in Aramaic makes it into the Qur'an in Arabic. Surah 37. Build for him, Abraham, a building. It is said that the building was like a furnace, and throw him into the blazing fire. So they plotted a plot against him, but we made them the lowest. So you have Abraham in a burning fire. Abraham out of the furnace of fire of the Chaldees. Misinterpretation of Genesis 15 from the Hebrew to the Aramaic by dumbass here in 1st century AD. That is what happened. And it ends up here. This is not what actually happened. It's not biblical. We know the source material from Jonathan ben Uziel misinterpreting this. That's where this whole idea comes from, Abraham and Nimrod's fire. Surah 21, they said, burn him and help your gods, if you will be doing. We Allah said, O fire, be you coolness and safety for Abraham. Quran doesn't know the name Nimrod, so it can't pull that name out of the hat. Because Muhammad didn't know his name. He didn't remember the name Nimrod. If it came from God, if this was at all true, you would think Cain, Abel, and Nimrod would have shown up in the text, as would Simon of Cyrene, when you're talking about the others. All these names don't show up in the Quran for a reason. I'm telling you, if it came from God, they would have. So that alone is a problem. So this is the book that I use. That's the reference. Way back, I said it at the end of my slides. I'll show you that book. But anyway, there are many more. I'm just gotten started, but there's much more to show as I go over time. But what's my final point? I mean, I really want to hit home that this stuff comes from sources that post-date Christianity by 100 years. And come from all sorts of source material. We know its sources and we know it's false. So if it comes by miracle, it's coming not from God, because this stuff is made up and it's false material that is based in pagan ideas. And if you're trying to get away from pagan ideas about divine beings coming down, you wouldn't use this material if the story of Islam is true. It wouldn't even come out of that. So the miracle would be that he got other material, not this material. So this material appearing in the Quran it doesn't help to say that it came out of God. That doesn't help. It actually makes it worse. It's better to say he got it from his environs and hearing it. And he did have access to Gnostic teachings. And he did have access to this material because he was well-traveled and he was involved in merchant trade. So he would have talked to people. And people always talk up the fantastical stories, the new things, the exciting things, not the old boring stuff from the deep, dark past. So he would have been more likely to hear the more fantastical, legendary material than anything else. That'd be more likely to pick up on, and that's why it shows up in the Quran more than the legit original stuff. Plus, the legit original stuff went against what his preconceived notions. And so he didn't want the original stuff. He had a bias against them. So, and you can say that with more confidence now that you know that what he did choose was bogus to begin with. And so, you know, the New Testament being written in Greek and the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament being in Greek, not Coptic, not Syriac, just shows how old it is. And no, it wouldn't have been written in Hebrew because Hebrew was kind of a dead language at that day. So why would you write a book for the world to see, of that world to see, in the language that was dead at the time? It's being revived now, which is itself prophetic. But in the first century, Hebrew wasn't commonly used. So no one was reading it. Aramaic wouldn't have gone to the whole world. It would have just gone to a small group of people. So if you wrote the New Testament in Aramaic, that wouldn't make sense. You'd have to write it in Greek, which was the language of the day, which was the language of the scholarship. If something is written as if it was a historical document, is written in Greek in the first century. So the fact that the New Testament, its original language is Greek, tells you it's first century and it dates to the time of Christ. And it was written to the people at the time. And the Jews at that time were Hellenistic. They did speak Greek. And the educated ones, who would have been the ones reading anything, if they were illiterate, they wouldn't have been reading anything anyway. And they did speak Greek because they had to communicate with the Roman soldiers who did also speak Greek. And they spoke their Latin as well. But the common language of the day was Greek in the first century. That's why this stuff was written that way. And it was all written in the first 30, 40 years after Christ. The four Gospels were. That's without a fact. That's without a doubt a fact. Within the lifetime of people who could have said, yeah, I did, or yeah, I didn't write that. So Mark wrote it, Matthew wrote it, Luke wrote it, and John wrote it. And anybody coming after him, if you put their name on a gospel 100 years later, that guy didn't write it because he was 100 years dead. And now you write that stuff when they can't say nothing because they're dead. And no one else is alive. No old great-grandmom is alive anymore to call you out. So that's just logical. And I hope it sheds light on things. And if you hate me, you hate me. I don't care. But I'm interested in truth, and I want you to know the truth so that you can respond to the gospel and be saved. Because time is short, and I'm getting on top of it. All right. I'll leave it at that.